Amanda Christovich from Front Office Sports Business Reporter is on hand in San Antonio on Twitter at Amanda Christovich with an extra H, which I believe stands for, hey, I'm just trying to drink a glass of wine and these bands keep rolling through on Riverwalk. Every single person we have talked with who is in San Antonio, I always start with, that's my favorite Final Four city. Is this your first experience there, and why do you think it should always be in San Antonio?
Okay, so here's my lowdown. I have never been to San Antonio. It has been very fun.
Yeah.
The Riverwalk definitely kind of feels like the Pirates of the Caribbean
Yeah.
Disneyland ride.
Yep.
But it has been like very fun, very walkable as a New Yorker. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, you are referring to a tweet where yesterday I was on a balcony enjoying a glass of wine and dinner with my friend who's in town. Actually, she's a Gators fan. So if there was anyone who was more annoyed by the Houston Cougars band rolling down the river, playing, as loud as they possibly could below us, it was her.
Yeah, I bet.
It's been a great experience so far.
Yeah, look, I've been to San Antonio for, 3 Final Fours. They shouldn't go. That in Indianapolis would be fine with me. All right, let's get to, we have House versus the NCAA, which is a noon start, and it will go throughout the day. And I know this is you've been on this story for, well, probably more than a year, but it's been ongoing. This movement has been ongoing for a while. And do you think that Judge Wilkins is going to rubber stamp an approval here? I know there's hearings and there's going to be some objections to the deal, to the settlement. What do you think Judge Wilkins is going to do, if it's even wise to predict what a judge is going to do in any situation?
Well, with Judge Wilkin, you kind of never know, because she has a mind of her own, in the sense that she's not concerned at this point about, making the lives of everyone in the college sports industry more difficult.
Right.
So let's just start with that, which is, evidenced by the fact that she set this very important hearing for the day of the men's national championship.
She's obviously not a Gator, a Cougar, an Auburn Tiger, or a Duke Blue Devil.
No, she's just not a basketball person.
Right.
Because this hearing was set like 4 months ago,
Right.
and we were all like, oh boy, here we go. So she's not going to rule today, most likely. So I just want to start with that.
Right.
It doesn't seem like we're going to get any sort of bench ruling. But, I do see a good argument for her approving the settlement, because the objections that are being raised today are about roster limit issues, gender equity, antitrust concerns, and none of those issues seem to move her to the point of not approving the preliminary, version of the settlement. So I'm not really sure what would have changed. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm not sure what I personally think, but I cautiously believe that she will approve the settlement at some point in the next few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I think for her to not approve this, because she actually already sent it back. She already said, nah, I don't like the other one. Bring me a better one. They brought her a better one, and now this is what the hearing is over. And to me, having read a ton of stuff about this, much of which you've written, it's basically don't let good be the enemy of perfect here. And
exactly.
So we're talking about the fringes, and not that the fringes aren't important, but there's just no possible way you're going to be able to satisfy everything. Do you? And I know you're not a lawyer, and we're going to talk to a lawyer tomorrow about this. But is there a sense that the lawsuits aren't going to stop, regardless of how she rules?
I think the lawsuits aren't going to stop about other issues.
Right.
So the athlete employment question is not being addressed here. Transfer portal eligibility not being addressed here. Athletes seeking damages who played, during or before 2016, which is when the damages for NIL start here. There have been a flood of lawsuits that older players have filed against the NCAA. Those are going to continue because this lawsuit doesn't address those.
Right.
So I think that all of these other issues, and then I think there's going to be a lawsuit for whatever NIL collective gets a deal rejected through the clearinghouse that is being put together, right? So no, I don't think the lawsuits are going to end. One thing I did want to note, though, which I'm sure the lawyers will speak to more eloquently than I can, is like, I think none of the objections being raised are unreasonable. I think what folks are getting confused about, though, is like, this is a settlement to settle a lawsuit. It is not a collective bargaining agreement. It's not a referendum on the future of college sports. That's not the job of the judge here, and it's not the job of the lawyers either. It's to settle an antitrust litigation problem. So even though these objections might be, fair and true, they're just outside the scope of settling these three lawsuits. So I think that's important to note as we watch how Judge Wilkin approaches the settlement and the objections themselves.
Amanda Christovich is here on the Adam Gold Show, Front Office Sports. You can read her stuff online. You can read her stuff at Front Office Sports. You can get the newsletter, as I do. Amanda Christovich with an extra H at the end of it. Or it's an A Christovich. I said Amanda. It's A Christovich with an H at the end of it. I want to move on to another issue, but I do think you said something in terms of antitrust. With a salary cap in this settlement, and the lawyer, when we speak to lawyers tomorrow about this, I'm sure they will say nothing that happens today is going to prevent an antitrust lawsuit for artificially capping what athletes can earn, because it's not being collectively bargained here, and that will be an issue. But that'll be a story for us maybe tomorrow. You're at the men's Final Four. Women,
I am, yes.
Right. The women crowned a champion last night, half a country away, and first of all, I know you would rather be in both places. Right? It would be great.
I would rather be in both places, but unfortunately I can't clone myself.
Right. I totally understand. And I think Christine Brennan, a friend of mine who works in Washington, D.C. and a columnist for the USA Today, in other years has gone back and forth, and then went to the Masters the following week when it was all over. Frequent flyer miles galore.
Yes.
Is there a movement? I know there's been some talk about combining the two Final Fours. I don't think that's good for the women, to be honest. I know the men have hey, that would be cool. Yeah, it would be cool because, you're not going to get swallowed up by it. Should the women have a separate weekend? Should it be before or should it be after? What would be better?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that is a very good question. Obviously, the NCAA has totally refused to even try combining the Final Fours. There certainly is a lot of, good arguments for not doing so. There are good arguments for doing so. But yeah, I mean, look, it just can't continue like this, because from the perspective of someone reporting on the men's championship, I was sitting in press conferences when the women's national championship started, right? So I guess maybe if you're a fan and the weekend every day, you get all these games and it's super fun. That's one thing. But, from an industry perspective, from a coverage perspective, having them at the same time in different places is just a really, in my opinion, it's a missed opportunity, because also all the industry folks are at the men's.
Right.
So
Charlie Baker's at the men's Final Four. He's not. He wasn't at the women's, right? Or maybe he went to the women's.
So Charlie went back and forth.
Yeah.
Big East Commissioner Val Ackerman always goes back and forth, but obviously, so I saw her on Saturday night at the men's Final Four, and then she said, I'm hopping on a plane and going back to Tampa to watch UConn win the national championship, which they did. Greg Sankey, same thing. He flew Southwest Airlines back and forth.
Greg Sankey don't have a private plane?
That's what I said. I couldn't believe it, and I'm sure he does have. There's a charter. Sure. I guess if he can fly direct, he just takes Southwest. That's
good for him.
Line. But yeah, I mean, good for him. He's going back and forth. He'll be back here tonight.
I think he's in Group 1. You think a Group A, was it Group A? You think Greg Sankey's in Group A?
I would hope so, honestly, because he tweeted a picture of his seat on Southwest, and I got to tell you, it did not look like it was first class. So, I don't know. It's certainly a decision. You know what? I appreciate that.
Sure,
I
sure.
appreciate that.
Regular
Everyman situation. But no, there's really not even a movement to move the women's championship to a different weekend, even though proponents of combining the Final Fours have even suggested that.
Yeah.
And I do think that, the women's tournament has gotten too big to be at the same time as the men's. And flying back and forth, look, it's just from a media perspective, like we can't afford that, right? Like, let's just be honest. It's not even about the logistics aside. It's just like not financially tenable in the struggling journalism industry.
No question.
So they got to do something.
Yeah, they do, and I don't think they're doing the women's tournament any justice. Television ratings for the women's tournament were down from last year, but that was to be expected.
Right.
But they're up from the previous year. So the sport is on a continuously growing trajectory.
Right.
They probably, and both head coaches last night agreed that they should separate this event out from all other NCAA tournament events or NCAA championship events and sell it to, a single bidder or maybe multiple bidders, but sell it as a separate entity as they sell the men's event. And what Dawn Staley said, to find out what the true worth is, I would be fascinated because I think women's basketball, especially women's college basketball, is super undervalued.
I would agree with that. At the beginning of the women's tournament, I spoke with the folks who did the media evaluation for the gender equity report in 2021, if you remember that. And they said, look, we valued the women's tournament at $80 to $112 million alone. And that was in 2021 before, the Caitlin Clark explosion. Right. They still believe that the women's tournament is undervalued, even with this current TV deal that values it at $65 million, which is way more than like the full 30 plus championship deal was before. It's a step in the right direction, but they still said, hey, we really think that the women could have gotten more than 65 million. The one interesting caveat to that, though, is I remember NCAA President Charlie Baker saying, look, my job is to do what is best for the entire NCAA. And we thought the deal we struck for all these 40 championships was the best for everybody, in addition to women's basketball. On the one hand, that makes sense.
Sure.
On the other hand, they have no problem, telling everyone to wait their turn when they negotiate the men's deal. They're not concerned with any other sport when they negotiate the men's deal. So, look, we're locked in until 2032 for this deal, and we'll have to see what happens then. There isn't going to be an opportunity for a renegotiation. That's just not how it works. The contracts are signed. It's all done and dusted for the next 6 years. So, this is what we have until then.
I would call that a missed opportunity at revenue for the NCAA for real. Amanda Christovich, A. Christovich with an extra H on Twitter. Enjoy the men's championship tonight. We saw history last night or yesterday afternoon, I guess. It was still light out. I don't even know what time of day it is anymore when it's light out. But Connecticut's 12th title, Gino Auriemma's resume is beyond anything I have ever seen in coaching, especially in the era of competition, because he has had to deal with real competition in the women's game as opposed to, like, say, Anson Dorrance with women's soccer or even the early stages of Pat Summitt at Tennessee. And Amanda Christovich, I thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the game tonight, and we will be reading you and talk to you soon.
Yeah, thank you so much.